And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got? Policy and markets, elections, current events. The broadcast master tells us how to win. I said,
hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, bringing you engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style, once again, and in partnership with the Washington Examiner as we do our level best to make sense out of nonsense. Thanks for joining us. Great show today. Looking forward to our lineup. We've got Beth Martin, who is honorary chairwoman for Tea Party Patriots Action, also founder of Tea Party Patriots, so one of the early leaders of the Tea Party movement. She had an op-ed published yesterday and foxnews.com, coronavirus relief, the money train needs to stop with the states, and she's been arguing in favor of reopening the American economy. We will get Beth Martin's thoughts here to kick off our interviews in the next segment. Then we will be joined by Liz Harrington, official spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Lynn will offer her thoughts on some of the craziness of the political dynamics today, whether it's the media, Joe Biden, what have you. We'll see where the conversation goes. And then he is unabashedly pro-free markets. John Tamny, editor of Real Clear Markets and vice president at FreedomWorks, rejoins us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads to make his unabashedly free market case for reopening the economy, but also we'll talk about some other economic topics, sort of big picture stuff here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But first, there seems to be an obsession right now by the media with President Trump's comments that supposedly suggested that people might want to inject themselves with cleaning materials. You know, Lysol or bleach or something, disinfectant. And so the media has been just apoplectic over this, saying, oh my gosh, poison control calls are up. Here's a sample of CNN Cut 8 just yesterday and how President Trump refused to take responsibility for this.
What do you make of the president saying that he can't imagine it? He can't imagine. I'm sure on one level he can't, but he is the one who suggested that people somehow inject themselves with these cleaners. So he suggested it, and people did it, and he's shocked?
Right. Look, he's disowning any responsibility for it, which shouldn't be shocking to any of us. But it's remarkable because, of course, he knows the answer to the question. The answer to the question is, yeah, I know what happened. Yeah, it's because I spoke last Thursday. And what I said was suggest to people that perhaps ingesting disinfectant might help cure coronavirus in some way, shape, or form. So he does know the answer to it.
He's disowning any responsibility. How dare he? He said you should inject yourselves with disinfectant. And now the president refuses to accept responsibility for telling people they should, and they did it. Well, first of all, that's not what the president said. He didn't actually say you should go ahead and inject yourself with disinfectant at home. He floated an idea. He shouldn't have done it. But he floated an idea that was like, well, this is something you're looking into, right? And the idea, look, first of all, the media and the left-wing Democrats who, like Governor Whitmer of Michigan, who are saying that calls to poison control centers went up because President Trump said this, they're basically saying the American people are morons. They are stupid. They can't tell an idea being tossed about from an actual suggestion, and that they are actually, if it is a suggestion, actually just taking the suggestion and running with it. First of all, they're belittling the intelligence of the American people. Let's just start right there. But that's only a piece of the puzzle. The other piece is that the idea that President Trump said this and people are acting accordingly is patently absurd. There is a great piece. Look, last night, I was thinking about this. I saw this clip of CNN. And last night I was thinking, gosh, there's got to be some evidence out there to show that perhaps the reason that poison control calls are spiking is because, I don't know, people are using disinfectant more consistently, regularly at their houses, especially if they have kids. We don't know the nature of these calls. We don't know the specifics of, are there kids in the home and they're concerned about kids? We don't know any of that information. So I wanted to do a little digging. What might we be able to tell from this increase in calls from the data to suggest either that it's a result of President Trump saying this, or it's the result of people using disinfectant, Lysol and others, Clorox, bleach, more often because they're cleaning their homes more often because they're stuck at home more often. And lo and behold, I found a great piece a few days ago from Elizabeth Nolan Brown at Reason, entitled, "No, Poison Control Calls Aren't Suddenly Spiking After Trump's Disinfectant Comments," which, by the way, just vindicates my ability to reason through this and look and say, maybe those people at CNN are themselves being the morons here, drawing conclusions without actually looking at the data. So what Elizabeth Nolan Brown points out is that, look, a story out of Kentucky that's being shared as evidence that people have been consuming household cleaners following Trump's Thursday statement is actually about calls to Kentucky poison control centers in March. Poison control centers around the country, including here in Kentucky, are seeing a spike in calls related to COVID-19, says WDRB.com story. Ashley Webb, director of the Kentucky Poison Control Center, told the outlet that just in March, we saw about a 30% increase in hand sanitizer exposures and about a 50% increase in household cleaners. A similar spike, Elizabeth Nolan Brown continues, in calls to poison control centers has been seen in many states. But these boosts all started in March as people began using more household disinfectants to try and stave off the new coronavirus, and not just last week. Michigan reported, quote, a 9% increase in calls for accidental poisoning from home cleaning supplies in March, according to ABC 57. In Maryland, over the past 6 weeks, quote, calls for toxic exposure to hand sanitizers have nearly doubled since the same time in 2018, according to Fox 5 Baltimore. In addition, the Maryland Control Center has had 95 calls for bleach exposure, more than double last year's 46 calls in the same period. There's more from Illinois. 2 people had inappropriate exposure to disinfectants after President Trump's COVID-19 briefing Thursday, according to WCIA.com on Friday. But a spokesperson for Illinois Poison Control told WCIA that this wasn't unusual and calls had been up 36% since the COVID-19 pandemic start, often related to people doing things like trying to wash produce with cleaners that are toxic for people to ingest. Shocker! People have been doing this more often over the course of the last couple of months, and there's been an uptick in calls. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, 28,158 people called U.S. poison control centers about possible exposure to household cleaners in March 2020, compared to 25,021 in March 2019. The number of calls about possible exposure to disinfectants went from 12,801 in March 2019 to 17,392 in March 2020. Folks, that is a noticeable increase well before President Trump floated his idea about possible disinfectant injection type of a situation. Floated this idea, hey, you're looking at it, right? That's nonsense for the media. Of course he shouldn't take responsibility. I didn't play the clip because I didn't think it was worth hearing President Trump say, deny any responsibility or not even take responsibility. I don't even think it was really a denial of responsibility. It was just not taking responsibility for it because it was unnecessary. The media, in their zest and zeal to diminish President Trump in every which way they possibly can, they're going after the president on something ridiculous. This is their way of keeping his disinfectant floating of an idea last Thursday in the discussion. Because they don't want to get rid of it. They want to keep putting out this impression that President Trump is asleep at the wheel, that he's a moron, that he doesn't know what to do as president of the United States, and he doesn't understand science at all. Which is nonsensical, by the way, because for weeks and weeks he has been now urging states to continue with shutdowns. He's even condemned Georgia deciding to reopen yesterday because of Governor Brian Kemp's end of his stay-at-home order. These are not things from a guy who's not listening to his advisors. But they want to find any excuse to perpetuate that narrative, and here and now, that's the way in which they're perpetuating the narrative, is to say poison control centers are getting a spike in calls. But then we have Vice President Joe Biden. Biden has been suggesting, apparently, according to a Politico article, that President Trump might actually postpone the November elections, which constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley called a conspiracy theory. Real quickly, let's play cut 3. This is President Trump responding to this notion put forward supposedly by former Vice President Biden.
A question about the 2020 election.
Yeah.
Your likely Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, recently suggested that you were considering changing the date of the election, that you might try something like that. That's my first question. The same
I
question.
never even thought of changing the date of the election. Why would I do that? November 3rd. It's a good number. No, I look forward to that election, and that was just made-up propaganda, not by him, but by some of the many people that are working, writing little statements. I see all the time, statement made, you say some statement made per Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe. He didn't make those statements, but somebody did. But they said he made it. No, let him know I'm not thinking about it at all. Not at all.
President Trump was being much too nice to Joe Biden. If I were President Trump, I would say, that's absolutely dumb. I can't do that. Constitution requires it. Not going to move it. Not happening. Joe Biden, check your facts. Instead, he was trying to be nice and say, oh, no, I don't think he actually said it. Well, according to Politico, he did say it. And clearly, Biden's perpetuating, as Turley rightly puts it, a conspiracy theory. And shame on Biden, if indeed he did say it, and I believe he actually said it. Shame on Biden for doing so. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. We're going to get started with our great guest lineup coming up when we return here after our video break on Jimmy at the Crossroads. When we come back, we'll be joined first by Beth Martin, honorary chairman of Tea Party Patriots Action, to delve into the reopening of America. Keep it right here. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger on Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Attention! This is the automotive version of the National Census. To complete the National Census, simply speak into your radio in a loud, clear voice when you hear this sound. I will record your answer when you hear this sound. Okay, let's begin. What is your name? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Please speak louder. 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 All right, Mr. Flurton, how many people are in your automobile right now? Did you include the body in the trunk? I thought so. Now give me the correct number. Thank you, Mr. Flurton, for completing the National Census. Your results will be tabulated and added to the large pile of garbage floating in the Pacific Ocean. Thank you for taking part in the National Census.
We interrupt this program for a very important presidential message.
I'm Donald Trump. As you know, people of America, the elections are coming up in November, and I have some very distressing news for you. Very distressing and disturbing. Did you know that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are both porch pirates? Do you know what that is? There's hundreds of hours of video evidence of Nancy Pelosi coming up on your porches and jujitsuing your precious packages. While Chuck Schumer waits in the street in the getaway van because he's too afraid to be a man and do his own dirty work. She has to do the dirty work just like she always does. Remember that this November when you go to vote, a Republican would never do that. He'd never take your precious little tot's choice. Never. And so think of that when you vote this November. Thank you very much. God bless and have a great day.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get you back to your host, Mr. Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, bringing engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Thanks so much for joining us and being a part of the program. By the way, if you want to join into the festivities, please feel free to tweet at me 24/7, 365 at Sang Center. That's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. You can also email me via my website, jimmysangenberger.com. Remember, there's no A, there's no I, there's no U in Sengenberger. It's all E's all the time. Once you know that, Sengenberger is easy. And of course, if you have not done so yet, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, and follow our friends at the Washington Examiner on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So the battle to reopen the country sort of began over the weekend with states like Colorado, at least parts of Colorado where we're broadcasting from, and Georgia and a number of others, beginning at different paces, but beginning the reopening effort. How much longer should the economic shutdown, should the societal shutdowns we have today continue to last? Should we reopen across the country everywhere, or should most states reopen? How should we look at reopening America? And then also, What about the idea floated by Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, that perhaps we should allow states to be able to declare bankruptcy if they are extremely stricken right now financially, particularly as a result of coronavirus? Let's talk about it with the founder and honorary chairman of Tea Party Patriots Action, Jenny Beth Martin, who joins us now here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jenny Beth, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's just jump right into it. I mean, we're starting to see, slowly but surely, nevertheless it's happening, a reopening of America. What do you make of the debate over that right now? Big picture.
Well, I live in Georgia, one of the states where my governor is reopening and was one of the first ones out of the gate to announce his intent to do that. And I'm very glad to see that we are reopening here, and that there are other states across the country who are either in the process of reopening or at least have plans in the works that will be enacted very soon. We have, on average, over 500 Americans losing their livelihood every single minute in our country right now, and we cannot continue to do that. And every minute that we wait is another minute that makes a difference in hundreds of Americans' lives.
Now, of course, Georgia, the state where you live, is catching a lot of national flack, especially from the media, for Governor Brian Kemp's decision to reopen. What do you think is the reaction from the media versus the reaction of people in the state of Georgia? And do you think that Governor Kemp's approach is the right one, at least for Georgia?
Well, I think that the reaction from the media just shows that the media did not do the research. They don't actually understand the shelter-in-place order that Governor Kemp issued on April the 2nd. That shelter-in-place order set up what needed to happen for critical infrastructure businesses. They had to follow a set of 20 strict guidelines or requirements to continue operating. It also allowed for not critical infrastructure businesses to perform basic minimum operations under the exact same 20 requirements. What happened was he banned a few industries in the state and said they could not operate at all, but everyone else had a way to operate. The industries that he banned were nail salons, hair salons, tattoo parlors, massage therapists, and also large gathering venues like theaters, bowling alleys, stadiums. So when he's going to go reopen and get people doing basic minimum business operations, which is still all you can do in Georgia right now, the only place to lift the ban was on the places that he actually put a ban in place. Otherwise, if you'd read the executive order from him, you would have seen that you could find a way, if you had a retail business, to do curbside pickup or phone deliveries or deliveries. And there were guidelines you had to follow, but the media didn't do that. They looked for the sensational. They went with the sensational without actually doing their research.
Let's talk about the economic harm nationally. Now we are hearing very dire projections of maybe 20% negative economic growth for the second quarter after we had been rising by an average of 2 to 3% for quarter after quarter under President Trump. Clearly, the economic toll here is sizable. I've been arguing that you cannot ignore the role that the economy plays in public health. But what do you make of those stunning projections, and particularly because those projections, I think, are based on a continuation of this closure of America, which I think if we don't open sooner than later, as in like now, that you could start to see a slower and slower economy to the point where we could potentially reach, if these policies persist, the level of a Great Recession, if not worse.
Well, yes, we absolutely could. And we may still, given the policies that some governors have taken around the country. The government cannot make up the entire gross domestic product of the entire country. Right. It is not possible to do that, certainly, and not have the kind of thriving, vibrant country that we have in America. And there are dominoes in place that are beginning to fall because businesses are going out of business. The longer that this drags on in some states, the more likely businesses will not be able to reopen. That means they cannot continue to employ the people who they were employing. It means they cannot pay the leases on the buildings where they may have had space and were renting or possibly a mortgage. They're not paying the utilities. That affects the lease company, it affects the banks, it affects the utility companies. The people who own the business may wind up going bankrupt. They may lose their house, they may lose their cars. And there are a lot of unintended consequences that I think government bureaucrats, because their expertise, not because they're bad or malicious necessarily, it's just they have an area of expertise and it's not running businesses. So they don't understand quite the impact that their decisions are having. We've got to get things reopened so that we can, and we need to do it in a way that respects the fact that social distancing needs to be in place, and we're going to have to balance that for a while still in our country. But we have to be able to balance lives and livelihoods.
Yeah, I think it's an important point, and I made it yesterday as well, about the medical professionals who are in these public health departments and roles, that they are specifically supposed to look at what are the policies solely for this health area. I mean, if you are a medical doctor and you have sworn the Hippocratic Oath, then it's kind of in your nature that you're going to be looking primarily at that, perhaps solely at that, and not considering some of these other factors. But I really want to get your reaction. Bill Gates, the former CEO, the founder of Microsoft, has been on CNN and numerous other outlets as an expert here as far as how to address the pandemic. And in Cut 7, this is Bill Gates on CNN yesterday, I think, where he was asked about the predictions previously that we saw and then the prospect and timeline for reopening.
The Florida governor says, look, there were all these models that predicted to us that we would need 200,000, 300,000 hospital beds in use for COVID. We have 2,000 beds. In other words, the predictions were way off. We didn't, and the implication is they didn't do an enormous amount of the hardcore lockdown, and they're still okay. What do you say to them?
Well, I wouldn't say they're okay. They're not suffering as widespread an epidemic yet. If they open up enough, they can go back into exponential growth and, compete with New York on that basis. The uncertainties about this mean that because of the exponential nature of this, yes, some models were wildly wrong. Models are never going to be perfect in these things, but we can learn, when you have countries that are sending, say, young children back to school, Germany, Denmark, Austria have a good enough testing regime, more competent than the US, so they actually will be able to see the effect of that. Norway's actually doing it in a differential within different parts of the country, which will help inform us. The problem with the United States is that unless you interdict travel, any state that goes too far and gets into that exponential growth will be seeding other parts of the country, and so it'll be like international travel.
So that's a little bit of Bill Gates last night. What do you make of that from somebody who certainly isn't particularly inconvenienced by the economic shutdowns that we're facing, but he is an advocate for, it seems, an indefinite continuation of these policies, Beth Martin?
Well, when I hear Bill Gates right now, what I'm thinking of is a barber who was interviewed on Fox News over the weekend. He's from Atlanta. He has 3 different barber shops in Atlanta. And Al Sharpton had said something about how it's too early to go back. And this barber was saying, well, Al Sharpton might have a couple $1 million in his bank account, but the barber doesn't. And he's trying to do everything he can to save the investment that he has made and to make sure that he is able to continue his ability to provide for himself and his family and not lose everything. And I think that sometimes, maybe even with Bill Gates, he's forgetting that because he's so far removed at this point in his life from what it was like when you were just struggling and starting a business. So there's a little bit of a disconnect. But the other thing is this, with the spread that we did from President Trump and the coronavirus task force, Part of the goal of that was to prepare hospitals and to increase our ability to test people. We've done both of those things. We can test people, states are able to test people more, and we're going to continue to ramp up the ability to test people quickly. And the other thing that we've done is we have prepared the hospitals. We're still producing more ventilators. We have ventilators. We have the ability to move ventilators from one part of the country to another with the air bridge. And we also have increased the personal protective gear, the masks, the gloves, the other things that the doctors and medical professionals need. And we're continuing to increase the supply of those as well. Because we're doing that, hospitals right now, at the end of April, 45 days after the first 15-day and then the second 30-day slow the spread, are in a much different position than they were when we went into this. They're much better prepared, and they are ready to handle a surge much better than they were 6 weeks ago. And we have to remember that that's where we are now. We're not where we were then. And there's still going to be people who get this virus. It is a contagious virus. And the people who are at the greatest risk, we are able to identify those people now. And I think those who are not, like me, need to make sure we're reaching out to the ones who are at high risk to make sure they have what they need so they don't have to put themselves in harm's way.
Oh, very true. Jenny Beth Martin, again, our guest, honorary chairman and the founder of Tea Party Patriots Action, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I mean, one point that I've been making, too, is you notice that for the most part, not always the case, but for the most part, those who were cheerleaders of an indefinite shutdown of America, particularly the American economy, they're the ones who have the greatest faith in the government's ability to provide for the people indefinitely, but also believe firmly that the government has a role to do that. I think you and I, as conservatives, have a natural and understandable distrust of government and recognize that, no, you're not actually going to be able to save every business. You're not actually going to be able to provide for people for months on end. That's just not practical. And also, by the way, it's just not something that you should be doing as government in the first place. Do you agree with me that there's sort of a fundamental philosophical outlook difference as well?
Well, there is a philosophical outlook difference for sure. Those who want more government control versus those who want constitutionally limited government. And the other thing is that the people who are advocating for more government control, the absolute most, are actually the people who are employed by the government. They aren't worried that they're not going to get paid. Perhaps they think that an economic shutdown is like a government shutdown, where they go home, they don't work, they're told they cannot work, and at the end of the shutdown, they still get all the money that they would have earned had they been working. That's not how an economic shutdown works. You don't, if your company, the company you work for isn't bringing money in, it's going to be really hard for them to be able to pay you. So it's much different, and they don't, their worries and concerns are much different when they are relying on the government to give them a paycheck, and they aren't as worried about losing their job as the rest of us.
Just a couple more minutes with our guest, Jenny Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots Action. Let's talk about, and we're going to delve into greater depth on this tomorrow with another guest, but let's talk a little bit about the push from some on the left to bail out states like New York and Illinois that are dealing with public pension crises that, by the way, predated, of course, this coronavirus crisis. There's a call now for the federal government to bail them out versus Mitch McConnell, who suggests, well, maybe we can help you, but using the bankruptcy code to do that. What do you make of this debate, Jenny Beth?
Well, I think that they should have been taking steps earlier to figure out how they could cut their budget to meet the obligations that they have. And they haven't done that. They haven't made cuts. They haven't made sacrifices. People are leaving their states and going to states like Texas and Florida that have a much better tax code than Illinois and New York. And now they're looking at this coronavirus as a quote unquote opportunity for them to be able to solve other financial problems in their state that are completely unrelated to coronavirus. I don't think that's right. In fact, I think it's fundamentally wrong for them to expect the rest of the country to bail them out like that.
Jenny Beth Martin, just a final question. the wake-up call for people across the country regarding government's role. I mean, for me, it's a reaffirmation that we cannot trust government will be there for us during these kinds of crises. We have to make sure that we're taking initiative as individuals and keep government limited, because bigger government's not even going to be able to help you when the crisis hits. But there's also those who might come at it with the lesson of, well, this shows that we need government to be ready to handle these crises. It needs to be bigger. We need Medicare for all and this and that. How do you think the American people, when this crisis is all said and done, will look at it from a fundamental lesson standpoint?
Well, I think that there are going to be a lot of lessons that we have to learn, and we were headed towards a debate between socialism and capitalism in our country. I think that that debate is going to wind up coming into the forefront and be the focus of this campaign season. Do you want more government control, or do you want less government control? And who do you think is going to be able to revive the economy the best? Is it going to be with more government control, like states like Illinois and New York that want bailouts right now? Or is it going to be from policies like the states of Texas and Florida that encourage economic growth? And I, for one, am going to be doing all that I can to stand for free market capitalism so that we can have that growth, so everyone can have the opportunity that we had prior to this crisis.
Same here. Jenny Beth Martin, Tea Party Patriots Action. Great to talk with you. Last time I had seen you was at the September 21st rally outside the ICE facility in Aurora, Colorado. So good to see you again, and I hope you have a great day and be well and healthy.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you. Again, Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, and I think she's absolutely right about the fundamental point with these states is that they need to be held responsible, and they need to be more responsible moving forward in the future, and not just expect that the federal government is going to swoop in and bail them out. That's for darn sure. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we will be joined by Liz Harrington, national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee, and then John Tamny from Real Clear Markets and FreedomWorks, giving the unabashedly free market view on this crisis. Keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Hi, Tom. Gee, you look terrible.
I feel terrible. Achy, fevery, nauseous.
Ooh, that's too bad. You know, you ought to...
Chills, stuffiness, bloating.
Yeah, you know...
Scratchy, gassy, drippy.
I know. Say, Tom, you should try Wearaflu.
Wearaflu?
Wearaflu is the only medication that actually takes your flu symptoms and hides them at various places inside your body, so that by the time your body finds them all, your flu is gone. In the meantime, you're back to work.
You were right, Ed. Wearaflu lets me ignore my flu symptoms and gets me back to work. Thanks.
Yeah, and thanks for coming in and infecting the rest of the office.
Come out wherever you are with Wearaflu. Take as directed.
Hey, this is Frankie.
Hey, and I'm Angelo. We're the owners of F&A Pizzeria. If you're looking for the best pizza in town, remember us. F&A.
Hey, we got the best crust.
F&A.
We got the best cheese.
F&A.
We got the best sauce.
F&A, man.
Put it all together, what do you got?
F&A.
Yeah, you got that right. F&A.
F&A Pizza on the corner of Hill Yeah Avenue and Dam Straight Street.
Do you suffer from feelings of entitlement, self-righteousness, and arrogance? Fits of resentment, anger, and hypocrisy? Terror that the world is going to end, or even worse, that the world isn't going to end and that things are going to get better? A deep need to point fingers, deflect, or deny? Uncontrollable stress, frustration, or depression? Fear of recession, fear of no recession? Then you may have PTDS, or President Trump Derangement Syndrome. Fortunately, there's new Magatol, the proven cure for PTDS. Just one Magatol a day realigns your sensibilities by bypassing erratic brain signals to amplify the logic receptors. Talk to your Obamacare doctor today to see if Magatol is right for you. Recommended dose of reality is at least once daily. Warning snowflakes. Side effects of Magatol may include optimism, hope for the future, good feelings about your country, accepting economic prosperity, renewed faith in capitalism, and admitting that things aren't so bad under Trump. If you discover you are allergic to common sense, stop use immediately and contact your doctor. Relax. Breathe. It's Magatol. From the makers of Triggerol.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's get back to your host of Jimmy at the Crossroads, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. So great to be with you on this Tuesday, April 28th. Thanks for joining us. John Tamny from Real Clear Markets and FreedomWorks up next. My thanks to Beth Martin, honorary chairman for Tea Party Patriots Action, for joining us in the last segment, talking a little bit about the discussion on the need to reopen America and get that process going. Now let's dive in to the craziness of 2020 politics. Now that includes media shenanigans and political dynamics for this election cycle, Joe Biden, and more. I'm pleased to welcome to the program Liz Harrington, who is the official national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee and joins us now on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Liz, welcome to the show. It's good to talk with you.
Hey, Jimmy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, big picture question for you. How do you assess the job President Trump has been doing so far when it comes to this coronavirus crisis? I mean, we're hearing from the media, basically it's the worst crisis handling ever.
Well, of course, they would say that. The media has been unbelievably hostile, even in times of unprecedented crisis, and really a virus that the world had never seen before. And of course, there was a lot of uncertainty at the beginning of this, and we're still learning information all the time. And when you look at all these facts in perspective, you see President Trump has been on top of this from the very beginning and brought in the best people. He appointed a task force on January 29th. He shut off travel against the recommendations of the World Health Organization that said travel bans would provide no public health benefit. He shut down travel on January 31st while China was still lying to the world about this virus. So you look at the decisive action from the very beginning and all throughout February as well. There was a testing system at the CDC that clearly wasn't up to the task when you have regulations that require all tests done in states to be sent back to CDC headquarters in Atlanta. We waived those regulations. That doesn't make any sense when you have to do the unprecedented task of massive testing that we've never had to do in this country before. So when you look at step by step and what the president's been able to do by mobilizing the private sector, you just saw him yesterday bringing in these companies. That's what made the difference to make the United States the leading tester in the world, not just in speed, but in quality, by bringing those companies in, the experts that can actually have the capacity to do it on this massive scale. And I think when we look back on all said and done, President Trump took the right steps at the right time, and appropriate measures have done throughout this process.
One thing that I was pleased to see with the president, and there was a little bit of shakiness when he talked about total authority of the president, but his policies beginning before that statement was made and after that statement have been consistently saying the states have the onus of responsibility for determining whether they're closed, whether they're open, how they're going to go about this, recognizing that each state may have particular individual needs. Hence why we can still have New York closed right now, while Georgia and to a somewhat lesser extent Colorado are starting to open. And that federalism position, I think, has been one of the most encouraging things about the president's policies, Liz Harrington.
Absolutely. We are not a one-size-fits-all country. We never have been. And it's important for states to make decisions that best are in the best interests of their own citizens. And so our response to a virus that was caused by central planning in communist China cannot be to have central planning coming to America. And unfortunately, that's what Democrats have been offering. You have Joe Biden musing with Al Gore about banning the family car during a pandemic, calling for the Green New Deal, which is nothing more than a central plan, the likes of what we've seen throughout human history that has failed everywhere it's tried, whether it's the Soviet Union or here in communist China and what we're dealing with now. So President Trump's approach has been relying on the unique qualities of what makes America great, which is that innovation, the entrepreneurial spirit, and the freedom to decide, that federalism that you spoke of. That is what will be used to solve these problems. And we're seeing it. Something that works in Florida might not be working in a state like Colorado, but those states are free to make their decisions. And you see Governor DeSantis in the Oval Office just now explaining to the rest of the country what he did and what worked. And that's what's great about having all these factories of democracy. We can learn what works best and apply it in other places.
Liz Harrington, again, our guest, national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Let's go to how the media has been covering this story. In Cut 8, I played this earlier at the outset of the show, but it's stunning how the media has been just obsessing over this musing of President Trump last week, the idea of injecting disinfectants, but not in the way that the media has been presenting it. And it was an idea that he was looking at his guiding scientists and saying, you know, you're kind of looking into what might be able to do to clean people's systems out and that sort of thing. Well, they've been obsessing over that musing on the part of President Trump to the point now where they're saying, oh, there's been a spike in poison control calls as a result of this. Here's CNN highlighting this supposed idea last night.
What do you make of the president saying that that he can't imagine it? He can't imagine. I'm sure on one level he can't, but he is the one who suggested that people somehow inject themselves with these cleaners. So he suggested it, and people did it, and he's shocked.
Right. Look, he's disowning any responsibility for it, which shouldn't be shocking to any of us. But it's remarkable because, of course, he knows the answer to the question. The answer to the question is, yeah, I know what happened. Yeah, it's because I spoke last Thursday. And what I said was suggest to people that perhaps ingesting disinfectant might help cure coronavirus in some way, shape, or form. So he does know the answer to it.
Last night, my reason led me to look online to try to find some more information here, Liz Harrington, and I found an article from Reason by Elizabeth Nolan Brown breaking down how in March, well before President Trump made this comment, in March of this year, we were already seeing more poison control calls, but that's because people are in their homes more, and you have much more disinfectant usage, and they're trying to pin this on President Trump, which is not surprising coming from the media, but it is stunning, I would say.
It's absolutely stunning. And if you'll notice, nobody said drink Clorox or rubbing alcohol except Democrats and the media. I mean, they're the ones that were hysterically amping this up and then, of course, freaking people out and say, oh, no, do I have a problem? That's, of course, not what President Trump was talking about. And of course, they ignore the fact that President Trump was absolutely right with his instincts when you're talking about the UV light and heat, using it in the lungs, which where's the media going to interview Cedars-Sinai Hospital that's already underway doing those tests to fight the coronavirus? But I also find it curious that CNN, whose own anchor, his wife, is literally taking baths in Clorox bleach. Chris Cuomo, that was their cure to fight the coronavirus. And yet they're going to lecture the rest of us about something that the president didn't even say. It is patently absurd. And this is why it's just such a waste of time to have the media with these gotcha questions that are doing no service to the American people. It sounds like they want people to drink bleach, just like they wanted someone to drink fish tank cleaner when there was a heck of a lot more to that story as well.
Well, I just have to say that talk about belittling the intelligence of the American people to try to take something that has been happening already for understandable reasons when you're around and using disinfectants a lot more and you're in your home a lot more, and saying, no, this is President Trump, and people actually listening to this idea, supposedly, and you're right that he did not say this, that they should drink bleach or Clorox or something like that. I mean, they just have such a low opinion of the American people. But then Chris Cuomo, you mentioned him. It was stunning that this is the guy who was in his basement, supposedly throughout the entire quarantine period, puts up a video where he's coming out of the cave and his kids are there. One of them is filming it. And he actually was out and about on Easter Sunday when he had that run-in with a bicyclist and got into, an argument with him, and yet was acting like he was doing his thing and keeping social distancing. And by the way, bringing his kids into it with that video, Liz.
It's unbelievable. It's so dishonest, and it's so arrogant to think that the rules that I'm going to lecture the rest of America to follow, and I'm going to shame people that are going on a beach in Florida, and then yet you actually have the virus and you're breaking quarantine when you're still contagious. And mind you, he was visiting a house that's not even finished being built yet. So it's not like he was indoors at all. And good for that bicyclist. These people, this is what I think you're seeing, the uprisings and protests. What people inherently have a problem with is one set of rules that the media and Democrats wish to live by, and then a completely different set of rules that the rest of us plebes have to follow. And that's why people are so upset. It's so arbitrary what Governor Whitmer did in Michigan, and micromanaging every aspect of your life to fight this virus. And yet you see these so-called elites aren't following the rules themselves. And that's the double standard that people are just so sick and tired of. And they're so arrogant that they can get away with it, but they can't hide the truth and then stage a fake, phony escape from quarantine. Who is buying this?
Liz Harrington, again, our guest, national spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Sticking with the topic of the media here, we weren't able to get this clip, but I have a quote here from Joe Scarborough saying this on Morning Joe yesterday. If the last 2 weeks haven't completely made null and void the 25th Amendment, if a president behaving this way while a pandemic sweeps across the country and kills more people actually than died in Vietnam War, and the president just said a couple months earlier that it was just one person coming from China, let me just say the 25th Amendment is de facto abolished. The massive growth of government in effect made void for all practical purposes, the 10th Amendment. You can add the 25th Amendment to that right now because this president is behaving in a way that is so dangerous, extraordinarily irrational, in the middle of a pandemic that is changing history, that is destroying our economy day by day. You get the picture, Liz Harrington. So 25th Amendment, this crisis demonstrates we need to use it finally to remove President Donald Trump.
Maybe we need a 25th Amendment for the mainstream news media.
By the way, did I do it okay in that reading? Was that okay? Was that emotional enough, on point to cover Joe Scarborough?
I don't think it was quite hysterical enough.
Okay.
I can't even watch Morning Joe anymore. It's just too hysterical and unhinged. And they've been using this for a very long time. I mean, just ask Andy McCabe, who's trying to use the 25th Amendment, and we'll probably be learning a little bit more soon about all of that corruption going on against this president throughout, before he was even elected. It's just unbelievable that now it shows there's nothing that Democrats in the media won't use to attack this president. This should be a fight that we're all in together. And this is a time to look and say, look what communist China did, not just to us, to the world. And yet here we have the mainstream media so eager, and Democrats, to place the blame at the feet of the American president when he acted. He's always acted. He's always taken it seriously. And yet they have no shame. They go back. What were they doing all throughout January? I believe they were saying our biggest national security threat was withholding aid momentarily to Ukraine. It had nothing to do with communist China. And so now the media is trying to rewrite the script. They're trying to say, oh, the intel leakers that we relied on to try to impeach a duly elected president were actually warning about a coming pandemic, when the media themselves was obsessed with impeachment that literally no Americans actually cared about. And they were also obsessed with downplaying this virus. There's plenty of clips that President Trump showed in the briefing room that showed the media wasn't taking this seriously. And in fact, President Trump was, and he formed the task force, as I said, he shut down travel. So their argument is just so inconsistent, but they're never going to be consistent. It's always hysterical attacks.
So something else that was very striking to me is Politico's reporting that Vice President Joe Biden has floated this idea, which I've seen some perpetuate this on the left, that President Trump just might postpone the 2020 November 3rd election. Politico reporting that this is something that Joe Biden has stated. Jonathan Turley, noted constitutional law professor, has called this a conspiracy theory, and rightly so. Now, this is President Trump, I think, giving Biden too much credit. This is cut 3. Yesterday at his press conference when he was specifically asked about this.
A question about the 2020 election.
Yeah.
Your likely Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, recently suggested that you were considering changing the date of the election, that you might try something like that. That's my first question. The same
I
question.
never even thought of changing the date of the election. Why would I do that? November 3rd. It's a good number. No, I look forward to that election, and that was just made-up propaganda, not by him, but by some of the many people that are working, writing little statements. I see all the time, statement made, you say so, statement made per Joe Biden, Sleepy Joe. He didn't make those statements, but somebody did. But they said he made it. No, let him know I'm not thinking about it at all, not at all.
I think President Trump was giving a little too much credit to Joe Biden. My suspicion is that Biden did actually say it. Why would President Trump think about it? And not only that, it's not even constitutionally authorized. He needs to do it on November 3rd. It's going to happen, and yet they're perpetuating this. What do you make of that idea, Liz Harrington?
It's absolutely bizarre. It's totally a conspiracy theory. And, you know, it really shows that this is Hillary 2.0. What was Hillary Clinton doing in the run-up of, Donald Trump, then candidate Trump, is not going to accept the results of the election. Meanwhile, Democrats have still not accepted the results of that election. And now they're doing the same thing. It's the same playbook. Why? The only party that's actually using the pandemic to meddle in the way we vote and the way elections are done in this country is the Democratic Party. They're trying to do a ruse for nationwide ballot harvesting, saying, oh, we just have to vote by mail because of this pandemic, when in reality they want to gut all of our voter integrity laws. You'll have no voter ID requirements with absentee ballots, no signature verification, and you'll have paid Democratic operatives like they do in California to go from nursing home to nursing home to nursing home, picking up thousands of ballots in bulk. So much for social distancing. So Democrats are the ones who are using this pandemic as an excuse to change the way we vote in this country. And maybe they're just trying to deflect from what they're trying to do nationally, but it's absolutely absurd that we would change President Trump's been so consistent on this. Of course, we're going to have an election. And Joe Biden supposedly was saying the same thing. You know, we had an election during the Civil War. We had an election during whatever pandemic he couldn't remember. He said it was in the teens. This is just absurd argument that Biden is trying to get attention out of.
Now, final question, about a minute left with you, Liz Harrington, and that is, in 2020, this election cycle is not what was anticipated. I mean, President Trump, I'm broadcasting from Colorado. He was just here in February with a big rally. I mean, rallies are part of the meat and potatoes of the Trump campaign. At least for the time being, he can't do those rallies. How do you think the virtual campaign, so-called, is going right now? Just give us a little eye into how the RNC is viewing it.
Absolutely. So we certainly wish we could get out there and do rallies. We love them. However, the RNC and the Trump campaign was able to seamlessly go online within 24 hours. So since the quarantines really started in mid-March, we've made 20 million phone calls, all with our grassroots volunteers that are using the skills and the trainings that we're doing them all online. And they're just, instead of door knocking, they're making more phone calls. So we're still very engaged. The Trump campaign is holding virtual events every single night. They're all getting over 1 million views. So we still have that energy. And we hope to be getting out in the campaign trail soon. But we've seamlessly switched online, and we see that energy that hasn't gone away.
Liz Harrington, spokesperson for the Republican National Committee. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always great to check in with you guys, and please stay well and healthy.
You too. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Again, Liz Harrington from the Republican National Committee joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Just a quick comment about the elections conspiracy idea that Joe Biden has been, it seems, perpetuating this notion that, that President Trump might actually push off the November election, which is not something he can constitutionally do, and it would be problematic even if he did. Why would he do that? There's no reason to. Now, what they're trying to do here is perpetuate that idea, particularly because there's a lot of different things that they would like to perpetuate about the election in 2020, just as they have done in 2016 with the obsession over Russiagate, for example. Liz Harrington was right that the Democrats haven't wanted to accept the results of the 2016 election, as they claimed the Republicans were not going to do, blaming Russia and saying it was all Russia's fault, which was patently absurd when you look at the number of views or number of impressions that they actually got from their surreptitious Facebook campaigns. Pales in comparison to anything that was just unsuccessful in the past electorally in terms of using the internet effectively. It was small numbers, really, that they were doing. Not saying it was good, but the idea that that had an outsized impact on the 2016 election is just absolutely absurd. But here's the thing. The Democrats are also trying to take mail-in ballots and paint this picture that mail-in ballots are easy to do, and therefore state after state after state should start setting them up. Look, we've talked about on this program, it's a good idea in my view to do mail-in ballots to spread that more, but you can't just do it overnight. It's going to take a lot of time to make it happen. And so the Democrats trying to put forward this idea that, you could easily do mail-in ballots, and President Trump doesn't support mail-in ballots. Yeah, he's not on board with the mail-in ballot idea, and I disagree with him in some aspects of that. But the idea that President Trump doesn't want mail-in ballots, therefore we should be having the media push mail-in ballots, is ridiculous. It's a good idea to talk about it and explore the issue, but at the same time, you cannot give the American people an overabundance of confidence in mail-in ballots. We're here in Colorado, again, it's where we're broadcasting from. We were the third state in the country after Oregon and Washington to implement statewide mail-in ballots. It was a process that took a decade, and now they're looking at within much less than a year, within like 8 months, getting such a system going. 7 months, just not possible. In every way they can, the media is indeed trying to perpetuate myths and misinformation, I think, about the elections in a way that's not positive, not helpful for the American people. We're certainly not going to sit still with that and stand for it. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You're watching Jimmy at the Crossroads in partnership with the Washington Examiner. Going to take a break, and when we come back, we will be joined by none other than John Tamny, Vice President at FreedomWorks and the editor of Real Clear Markets, to get his thoughts a little bit on the economic side of reopening and some other unabashedly free market perspectives on topics of the day when we return here again on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. Stay tuned.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
more politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We all have rules we have to follow. But what if you could have a direct hand in helping to write the rules that would impact your life or your business? I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and let's talk about exactly that. There's a lot of talk these days about the Trump administration's efforts to deregulate the American economy. If you think about it, though, deregulation is actually a great thing because it unleashes the unlimited potential of each and every individual. But in a lot of cases, you actually find folks advocating for more regulation, and frequently those people are the ones who will benefit most from the regulation. Such as big businesses like Facebook or General Motors that, if you put in more regulation, would be able to cut out the competition or directly benefit them. For example, putting up higher barriers to entry so that next small business, the next Mark Zuckerberg, won't really be able to get in on some of the action, some of the incredible opportunities. For example, last year we had the data privacy scandals for Facebook. Well, Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, went before Congress and testified before a Senate committee.
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or not.
But you as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right? So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
Okay. Would you submit to us some proposed regulations?
Yes, and I'll have my team follow up with you so that way we can have this discussion across the different categories where I think that this discussion needs to happen.
Look forward to it.
Now, what did you notice in this video? You had CEO Mark Zuckerberg say that he supports the right regulation, and a United States senator actually asked him to provide some sample regulations to potentially help write the regulations. Big businesses tend to support more regulation because it hurts their upstart competitors, say the next Mark Zuckerberg. That's why General Motors CEO Mary Barra has been advocating for a brand new effort to regulate in advance of the interests of battery-powered cars, which makes perfect sense because Mary Barra has actually begun moving forward with GM toward an electric-only future. So what you have here are big businesses having seats at the table day in and day out to help increase regulations to the disadvantage of smaller competitors. That's a case for less regulation, not more. And it's a message we can get across to millennials today, who are the most innovative generation, perhaps in history. That is a message we need to get across as well. So let's boldly proclaim it.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. In today's episode, the captain is making travel plans.
Sparks, open up a frequency to price expediosity line.
Yes, Captain.
Hello, and welcome to Price Expediosity Line. How can I help you?
Well, I'll need a room.
Are you traveling alone?
Yes.
Oh, that's a shame. Never found the right woman, huh?
Well, there was this... No, wait, just book me a bed.
King, queen, full, twin, Murphy, or bunk.
King. You never know.
Well, as long as you're convinced. All right, name your price.
Name my price?
That's how it works. Name your price.
$6?
$6 it is. Let's plug it in here. Bippity boppity boo. And sorry, you are outbid.
By how much?
Penny. Someone bid 6. Oh, 1.
Who?
Oh boy, I just booked a room for $6.01.
Well, will the captain ever make a good bet bid? Tune in next time when we hear...
Here's one for 602.
I'll take it.
$1,000.
No! Damn dramatic pauses on Starship Winkler.
Do you wear a toupee? Do you yell out, Spock? Do you put in pauses when you talk? Do you start real soft and then go real loud? Have you won 2 Emmys? Do you love a crowd?
Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner. Yeah, you got lots of macho and swagger. You had alien affairs. You sing bad but no one cares. You find low airline fares. If you like to work, got a handsome smirk. If you're Captain Kirk, whatever makes you feel like a...
Me. Phases on stunning. Whatever makes you feel like a Shatner.
Always good to feel like a Shatner. Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. So great to be with you. My thanks to Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots and Tea Party Patriots Action, I should say, and Liz Harrington from the Republican National Committee for joining us in the previous 2 segments here on the show that comes in partnership with the Washington Examiner. So great to be with you with engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style once again. And it is that time where I need a dose of unabashedly free market perspective here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And it is always a pleasure and a privilege to be with you on the show and get a little bit of perspective as well from John Tamny, who is the editor of Real Clear Markets, vice president at FreedomWorks, and also author of a number of books, including most recently, They're Both Wrong, a policy guide for America's frustrated independent thinkers. One of his great popular books has been Popular Economics, and John Tamny joins us now. John, sir, welcome to the show. It's good to have you, my friend.
Hey, Jimmy, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So, first of all, how are you doing? How have you been holding up it's been a couple weeks since we chatted.
Oh, it's a challenge. I feel very lucky to be working. That's what it comes down to. I don't claim to be a moral authority or anything like this, but it's hard to get full enjoyment because you know that there are tens of millions out there suffering, many with very little savings, having to go through this. And so even when you're happy, you kind of don't feel fully comfortable being happy because you know just how grave the situations are for too many. It's just a tragedy what we're having to witness.
So, John, I saw over the weekend you published a piece for Real Clear Markets, where you're editor, entitled, If GOP Governors Won't Reopen, What's the Point of GOP Governors? A pretty strong argument you have in your piece. Lay it on us.
Well, let's remember what is traditional Republican rhetoric, and it's rhetoric that probably I can speak for the both of us that we agree to, at least rhetorically, that personal responsibility, that we're adults, we can look after ourselves. We don't need other people to hold our hands. We don't need people to tell us not to do things that might harm us. And so Republican governors should be very clear that even if the virus that is before us is incredibly lethal, precisely because it is. We don't need a government telling us not to be careful. We can do that. We have businesses, we have jobs, precisely because we want them to succeed, precisely because we want to keep getting paid. We will do those jobs maybe in a different fashion, run the businesses in a different fashion. If Republicans aren't going to have unfettered freedom so that people can fight the virus with economic growth, well, why elect Republicans? Because we know the other party that promotes the nanny state. Republicans, are they going to do the same? I guess.
So you reference Alexis de Tocqueville, who, of course, notably had visited America and offered a lot of thoughts on our country. Why did you bring him up? Why bring up some historical figure from the early 19th century in your piece?
Well, for a couple things. For one, it's a reminder that people who used to work in government used to not work or who work in government didn't always. There are people who used to be in the private sector, presumably. And so it's for the first thing to at least implicitly say that just because someone's in government doesn't give them natural authority and skill at telling us how to do things and how to keep safe. But de Tocqueville made the essential point that Americans just by their nature form all sorts of organizations and bonds and different entities. They get together to fix things, to start businesses, but they do all sorts of things. They don't need government to tell them to not act in careful ways with a new virus that we don't have a vaccine for, that we don't quite understand. They don't, by extension, need government to tell them to be careful with that. They would do that on their own. And so if you didn't have cities and states and national politicians creating policies, Americans would create them on their own. They would figure out ways to deal with this, and probably very innovative ways that would have us much better situated for figuring out what the virus is and then solving it.
And one thing that you and I have talked about before, in fact, I referenced it on this show in regards to an entirely different topic on Friday. We've talked about some of the wisdom from the great late, speaking of the 19th century philosopher, economist Frederick Bastiat from France. And one of the things that he talks about, particularly in his writing, That Which Is Seen, That Which Is Not Seen, are the unseen consequences of government policies. If they could make a case that, yes, these shutdowns are actually saving lives, and it's been much more effective for the government to contain the spread using those shutdowns than otherwise. Let's just say that case, which hasn't been proven, but let's say that case has been demonstrated. At the same time, we must keep in mind that with every single government policy, there are unseen effects. I've talked about the broken window fallacy. Broken window by a vandal. Oh, that's great, because then it means that suddenly you're going to have somebody who's going to come in with glass that they had to get from a glass manufacturer and put up the glass, and the money flows out in the economy because of that. But the business that had the glass window busted open, what were they going to do with that money that they now have to use to pay back, to pay for the glass replacement? They might have gotten a new computer, might have hired a new employee, have to delay those purchases now. The same thing happens for an economy. Government makes a decision that you think, oh, this is going to be good. There are all these unseen consequences, which the private market can account for, the government cannot.
Oh, yeah, what you say is so important. I saw something in the Wall Street Journal today that alcohol consumption is up 26% amid this. How many people are soothing themselves with something that could harm their health in a much bigger way long term? Can we be clear that unemployment frequently leads to suicide? Frequently it leads to domestic violence, if you believe certain statisticians. Poverty historically kills. And so you look at that in the bigger picture, okay, let's agree that a lot of Americans have savings. Okay, and so they can to some degree get through this. They've got enough money to tide themselves over while the government is fighting the virus for us. Okay, but if they were still working, they wouldn't be spending all those savings, and those savings would be directed by financiers and other intermediaries to greater growth-inducing uses. What presently 30% of Americans have the capability of working from home. But imagine what would happen if instead of consuming all of our savings, we were investing even more of it. Maybe 20 years from now, 70% of Americans could work from home, so that if a true virus came along that was wiping people out by millions, we could have a stay-at-home order that wouldn't cause people to lose their jobs by the tens of millions. The unseen of the government shutdowns are endless, and they're potentially very lethal.
Well, I would quibble a little bit and say this is a true virus, but I get your point, to be sure. It's if we had something that was like the Black Plague and it was absolutely uncontrollable and you had no choice but to be in your home, we need to be able to allow that innovation to foster.
And let me just be clear. I've never denied the existence of a virus. I'm not one of these deniers. And in fact, in my case, precisely because I have no medical expertise, if you read my stuff, I've generally said, let's assume the worst.
Yeah.
But precisely because we're assuming, let's assume Imperial College, they've since been walked back, but those pronouncements, millions of Americans said, if you believe that, that's all the more reason for freedom, because free people are much more productive and they create wealth. You go back to when John D. Rockefeller had a grandchild, scarlet fever, felled that grandchild. He spent all sorts of money seeking a cure, couldn't get it. Capitalism finds cures for all sorts of former killers all the time. You know, pneumonia used to be the captain of men's death. It's no longer. And so if health is the question, the answer is always freedom, simply because it will produce the resources necessary to solve the health problem.
Now, you and I are both admirers of billionaires because they have created wealth. They've created wonderful things like Microsoft, for example, has revolutionized how we live our daily lives. No two ways about it. But at the same time, a lot of times folks look to billionaires for public policy ideas. And so I want to play a snippet. This is cut 6 of Bill Gates on CNN in the last couple of days, where he was asked about deadlines for coronavirus and some of the timing questions here with regards to reopening. Take a listen to this.
Well, we know that if we do these extreme social isolation measures, we get the reproductive rate below 1, which means that the total number of active infections starts to go down. What we don't know is we go slightly back to normal, which activities create the risk of a rebound. And so we need to put into place a very dense testing regime so you would detect that rebound going back into the exponential growth very quickly and not wait for the ICUs to fill up and there to be lots of deaths. You know, if you see the hot spot, you can understand the activities causing that, change policy there and get it back down to into the decline. So that the brute force tactic that was used did work. It worked in every country. But that's caused such immense damage. Now we want to back off from that. And we're a little naive about how to prioritize those activities. We need the testing. We need strong leadership where the scientific community and the politicians are saying, okay, what's the value? Things like school obviously have a very high value if we can figure out a format that's not driving a lot of infection.
One of the most successful businessmen and tech entrepreneurs in world history, Bill Gates, saying the government needs to make determinations as to which types of jobs, which types of businesses can be the ones to reopen. John Tamny, your reaction?
There's many reactions. The first thing, as you alluded earlier, there's no evidence supporting the claim that the lockdowns worked. Just to use one example, Texas locked down 2 weeks after California, yet the deaths per millions in Texas are quite a bit lower. Is the correlation exact? I wouldn't presume to know, but that's precisely why I don't want government calling the shots here. When government's calling the shots about how we can reopen, how we should do things, who should be able to be back in business, who shouldn't, it blinds us. We need intrepid individuals who own their businesses and who want them to survive to start experimenting. Some will be very open, but if they are, that's an economic decision. Maybe no one will patronize them. Some will be very stringent, as in there are going to be people walking throughout the business saying, okay, you're not far away enough from the other customer. That may not work either, but we need to know that information. We need to know from free people what they choose to patronize, what appeals to them the most. Let's go back to the 1980s. It was assumed that AIDS, if you just were around someone with AIDS, that they could kill you. Well, now we laugh about that. We don't know anything. And because we don't know anything, we're not just wrecking the economy, but we're blinding individuals and businesses as to what works, what will make sense in the future. This could be incredibly lethal. It could be very much less than lethal. Let's find out.
John Tamny again, our guest, Vice President at FreedomWorks and editor of Real Clear Markets. One thing about Bill Gates' discussion is that a lot of times people turn to billionaires because they've been very successful in private business, and they say, well, why don't you extrapolate your mindset, your outlook, and tell us what we should be looking for from our politicians? Sometimes they're called to advise those politicians. Perhaps billionaires can give some good advice, but I'm curious because Bill Gates has been all over the place, and his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, of course, has been giving a lot of money to research and development of cures cures for various illnesses and viruses, diseases, things like coronavirus. He's been speaking about pandemics since at least 2015 when he did a now famous TED Talk. But I'm curious what you think about how the media looks towards these billionaires and says, tell us how we should do government policies, especially when those billionaires that they tap to provide viewpoints particularly advocate greater government control, somewhat ironically.
It's a great question. Can we point out that probably if there were billionaires saying, hey, step aside and let free people do what they're supposed to do, suddenly the media wouldn't have such excitement about billionaires saying it. They're not always so laudatory of billionaires. Can we go back to the late 90s? Right. They wanted Gates' Microsoft broken up. So it's interesting there. But let's look at this from a sports perspective, because you and I like sports. Isn't it interesting how some of the best basketball, football, and baseball players in history haven't turned out to be very good managers and coaches? Well, why aren't they? Because coaching's an entirely different thing than playing. The skills required to be a great coach aren't necessarily translated from having been a great player. So to presume that just because Gates was a brilliant software creator and businessman, that somehow he's got unique knowledge about this doesn't make very much sense. The reality is Bill Gates could be the smartest person in CenturyLink Field in Seattle, but the total crowd in CenturyLink Field is quite a bit smarter than Gates is. They've got their collective knowledge is much greater. And that's what's so dangerous about this. Every time, and we've done this throughout history, a crisis comes up, a crisis proclaimed by those in politics, Republican or Democrat. And so suddenly they're taking their individual knowledge and substituting it for the market's knowledge, and it invariably leads to reactions and responses that create something much worse to begin with. Gates is brilliant, but to presume that he can be substituted for the marketplace, which did not want this reaction from government, is a very dangerous one.
Well, and here's another presumption that I think is false on the part of Gates, members of the media, politicians, others, is that just because you reopen the economy as it goes, government finally giving permission, doesn't mean businesses will right off the bat start doing it. They will then make their own decision. Is it good for me? Because say you go into a movie theater and suddenly there's a whole bunch of people who catch this disease, and it is because of the movie theater. They trace it and they find out that movie theater is going to be facing some real problems, just even from consumers who will remember you opened prematurely. These businesses will make a determination and say, is it smart for me to reopen my company, or should I wait a couple more weeks? The presumption from those who oppose reopening that the businesses will just suddenly flip a switch and make a decision, all of them, to reopen, just isn't reality. And that's part of why we can and should trust the market at this point to start taking the ball and running with it.
Absolutely. It's so important what you say. That's what my column had said on Saturday. Some theater owner in Atlanta said, I'm not ready to open up, even if they make it legal, for all the reasons you say. What if people spread the virus? My theater is always going to be known where the virus was spread. And that's precisely the point. This theater owner has the means to stay closed. Good. Other business owners literally need to get started last week. It's crucial that they be allowed to, because in getting started and opening, to letting crowds through, to letting a lot or a little through, they can then provide information to the Atlanta theater owner that he lacked before. As in, it would be dangerous. Crowded businesses spread, the virus spread was very quick. Or, actually, we found out that people were patronizing crowded businesses. It didn't transmit the virus much at all. We need to know this information. And so when governments impose one-size-fits-all solutions, we're blinded to what works. And as you say, not everyone's going to open right away. Everyone's going to open in different ways. You want people experimenting in myriad ways so we can find out what makes sense. What makes sense for businesses, but very crucially, businesses will lead consumers. They'll show them the way to the future. You can't do that when there are limits.
John Tamny, again, our guest from Real Clear Markets and FreedomWorks. Let's talk about some big government Republicans I've heard have said, well, we have to have all this spending right now from the government, more than what we've got. I mean, I have said, fine, if the government's going to shut things down, then you need to provide some relief to help people get through it. But there are those who are saying, you know what, we should shut down. They're Republicans, actually. They're not many, but there are some who are saying we should have these shutdowns persist longer because they believe the policy is necessary to do it. And we need to really ramp up the spending because we cannot allow Donald Trump or the Republicans, I mean, or you should if you want to keep the economy going and alive to some extent, and you don't want to become Herbert Hoover and lose a heck of a lot of seats in Congress. They lost well over 100 seats, the Republicans did, in Congress during that midterm election cycle. And so, you look at what's happening here and they say, oh, don't become Herbert Hoover, go ahead and spend more. What did Herbert Hoover actually do when he was president during the onset of the Great Depression time period?
Oh, Hoover got together with Congress and doubled government spending, massive increases in spending. The top tax rate on Hoover went up from 25 to 62%. Hoover signed into law in 1930 the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, which put record levels of taxation on 20,000 plus different foreign goods. Hoover was massively for big government. He was George W. Bush to Barack Obama's FDR.
I've said that too. That's exactly right. He was FDR 1.0, or like the prequel to FDR.
Hoover was very much a big government guy. Furthermore, it's a non sequitur. Implicit there is that if governments don't spend, that people won't spend. No. If I don't spend, I don't stuff it under a mattress. It's in the bank and it's being transmitted to someone else who has immediate spending needs. Or better yet, it's being transmitted to someone else who needs resources to grow their business in the form of investment. There's this idea among Keynesians and politicians that unspent money just sits there. No, it's just directed to its highest use. So when they say we need a targeted stimulus, what do they think investors do every single day? Now, no Republican would say government must spend trillions and trillions during good economic times. Well, so why on earth would they say it during bad times? This is when you want people to be spending the least so that there's massive amounts of investment funds flowing around that can be directed to a higher use. Tens of millions unemployed. What creates jobs? Investment. So you want government, you don't want government to play the big capital allocator right now. Government's track record as an investor is tragic. And so you want government pulling back. That's why historically, when recessions are untouched, when governments do nothing, the economic rebound is so massive simply because a massive amount of capital formation starts taking place. People are scared, they spend less, hence there's more capital available for businesses to grow.
Well, one important thing that I think we all need to keep in perspective, John Tamny, is the fact that, look, history is a good teacher. It is the best teacher of what has happened and what can be done. And the idea that what we're facing now, I've heard some say, this is actually a failure, demonstration of the failure of capitalism, which is exactly what they said about the Great Recession most recently, is that, oh, this was a failure of capitalism. First of all, recessions, when they happen as a flow of the natural economy, is really a cleansing of things. But you can look out at the Great Recession, and it was years of government policies in part that helped bring that about, impacting the way in which businesses were functioning, banks were functioning, and so forth. And then finally it collapsed and the system needed to be cleansed. But now in this particular situation, we have a virus, and the virus has then brought the governments to say, hey, we're going to shut things down, and then the economic crisis is following primarily government decisions. Now, that's not to say that everything is a natural flow of the government shutting things down, because as we were talking about before, had government not shut things down, some businesses would have slowed their activity. But to put this at the feet of capitalism in any way, even the smallest, most minute way, is just nonsensical.
Of course it is. What did capitalism have to do with this? 6 weeks ago, were we having these discussions? 7 weeks ago? No. What happened was that government went from having a largely non-interventionist approach to the economy to command and control. And the predictable result was tens of millions unemployed. You're right. In response to a virus, it's entirely possible that businesses would have shut down to some degree, or they would have limited the number of customers coming in. I doubt anything like this, but you don't just get 30 million plus Americans unemployed. That's always and everywhere going to be the consequence of a government overreaction to something that was never that scary to begin with. In the capitalist free market, what would have happened is businesses would have said, okay, wait a second. People are afraid of this to varying degrees. We're going to make adjustments so that we can meet their needs. We will stay in business, of course, to meet their needs. The capitalist system was not allowed to work. Instead, one size fits all command and control. So please, let's not blame it on capitalism. But invariably, that's what they do. And that's what's so important about the present. What I keep arguing to people is we need to get control of this narrative now.
Yeah,
and there are a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And earlier I made this point to Jenny Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots, is that I hope that the lesson that we learn here, when all is said and done, is one that we must distrust and have a healthy distrust of government, not the opposite. Some are saying, oh, this crisis demonstrates that we need a bigger government. We need programs like Medicare for All and others so that when we have a crisis hit, we can manage it better. My view is we should learn that government, not just that it shouldn't be there for you and that we shouldn't rely on government, but that you actually cannot rely on government to provide for you in the midst of a crisis. The final question for you, John Tamny, is do you think that this crisis will lead us to having the lesson of more distrust in government or more trust in government?
Obviously, it's a great question, and obviously I'm biased. What I've written is that if you're not an anarchist after this, then you need your head examined. Ha, ha, ha. I think so. I think there's going to be more mistrust. I think people see that the elites were sitting there from their fancy houses talking about how you can't get back to work, you can't do this, while the common person was put out of work. I'd like to think that the level of trust in government will plummet over this, since this was so clearly a consequence of their errors. And I'm also more optimistic that this time we will have more people like you, me, and countless people we know making sure that this narrative takes hold. Quite unlike the 1930s, the myths about the 30s persist to this day. The myths about 2008, we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to freedom to control this narrative.
This has been a Tuesday with Tamny. That is John Tamny, editor at Real Clear Markets, vice president at FreedomWorks, and most recently author of They're Both Wrong, a policy guide for America's frustrated independent thinkers. John, my friend, thanks for joining us and sharing your unabashedly free market thoughts today. Be well and healthy to you and your family.
Thank you so much for having me, Jimmy. Great show.
Thank you. Again, John Tamny joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And boy, time flies right on by, and this has been quite a fun show. I appreciate you joining us today on this Wednesday, April 28th. We're working up a great show for tomorrow. It will be Washington Examiner Wednesday. Let me go ahead and pull up who we just confirmed will be joining us from the Examiner. Nihal Krishan will join us. He's the economic policy reporter at the Washington Examiner, and looking forward to what he has to say, particularly about AEI President Robert Doar talking about ways to address poverty post-pandemic from a more free market perspective, I'm sure, because American Enterprise Institute looks at a more enterprising way of examining issues. Also, we will be joined by Joshua Sharf, who's a policy analyst at the Independence Institute and really just a pro when it comes to pensions, public pensions. He is a guru in that regard. I'm looking forward to getting his take on the prospect of bailing out these states that have been struggling because of pension crises that are now coming to fruition maximally during this crisis, Illinois being a primary example, New York as well. So looking forward to those guests and more coming up over the course of this week. But that is it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. If you have not done so already, please do subscribe, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. My thanks to Nathan Matoush, working the Matoush Magic as producer extraordinaire, our partners at the Washington Examiner. It's Jenny Beth Martin, Liz Harrington, and John Tamny, our guests today, and to you for watching. Thanks so much. Stay well, be healthy, and as always, may God bless the United States of America.